Good afternoon and welcome to this press briefing. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Krause. I work here at the Press Center in Copenhagen, and we are very glad to this afternoon, or this morning if you are in Nuuk, to welcome our two speakers from the University of Greenland in Nuuk, who will join us for this online session. I know that many of you have probably tried to reach out to Rasmus and Jeppe and some of their colleagues in recent weeks, and I know that it's been difficult for them to accommodate all the media requests that have been coming in. So what we hope to do today is try to do a little session where we can get some concise analysis from our two experts, and then also open the floor up for questions after some brief introductions. I hope that we will have a chance to, again, we know that much has been said and written about Greenland in recent weeks, but get some analysis from Rasmus and Jeppe, and then also I think they would probably both be reluctant to try to guess or foresee exactly what's going to happen, but at least with their knowledge and their background in their research, they can maybe point out a few areas or developments that it's worth keeping an eye on in the times ahead of us going forward over the next couple of months. So before I give the floor to Rasmus and Jeppe, I'll just say that as we've written out, we will record today's session and also put it on YouTube afterwards. And then when they have done their introductions from Nuuk, we'll try to go to the Q&A session. And I think this time, since we are only doing it online, we will just invite the journalist who's joined us to use the raise hand function, or even write in the chat. And then I'll try to call out the media from here, who will be invited to have a question or two or three for Jeppe and Rasmus. But without much more from me, I'm just happy that Rasmus and Jeppe could find time to join us, and then I'll give the floor to you guys in Nuuk. Welcome.
Thank you, Peter. And good afternoon, at least in Denmark. We are at the University of Greenland, Ilisimatusarfik, and we'll give you a very brief introduction and then turn into Q&A. My name is Rasmus, Leander, and I'm associate professor at the Department of Arctic Social Science and Economics, and director of Nasiffik, our Center for Foreign and Security Policy. I will focus on very current new dynamics. So for the second time running, the Christmas period was a little bit hampered in Nuuk and in Greenland because of signals from the Trump administration. And after Davos, as you might know, things are getting a little bit more calm. But there was a parliamentary session in the Greenlandic parliament in Nuuk yesterday, where there was a long debate about how should Greenland address some of these things. And there was a long discussion between the different parties, 4 of them out of 5 in government and 1 opposition party. I would like to just make 3 slogans or address 3 slogans that are very much used in the Greenlandic settings. The first came around in 2019 when Trump ventured the idea of buying Greenland the first time, and that was open for business, not for sale, and that is very much still the case. Then there's been a slogan that was used in the foreign and security policy strategy that came out almost exactly 2 years ago, nothing about us without us. And the last one has been, we don't want to be Danes, we don't want to be Americans either. And that is a slogan that has been reiterated several times. What has been happening just last week is that the diplomatic track is, at least for now, back on track. There was a Danish Greenlandic delegation in Washington started to make some of the negotiations that was agreed just a few years ago between Greenland, Denmark, and the US. We know the Greenlandic delegation quite well, but we have not had the chance yet to get a briefing on what's actually going on. And obviously, these kind of meetings are very much behind closed doors. We will probably in the not too distant future get some parts of a briefing of what is going on, but that would be hardcore Chatham House rules, so we can't really go into detail what is going on. What is being debated in a Greenlandic setting is that Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark has been very open for several years to have a more open for military presence, or even reopening some of the former military bases from the US. But we don't know what will pan out in the not too distant future and even the longer one, but we'll be hoping is that the diplomatic track is back on track, and that we can keep a diplomatic version of that, where Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark, the government of Denmark, the government of Greenland, been very open to that we can address some of the security issues that the Trump administration and also previous administration has been addressing. So that was my minute. I will turn the floor literally to Jeppe, my colleague.
Thank you, Rasmus. Yeah, my name is Jeppe Strandsbjerg, and I have a dual identity, at least. I'm associate professor at the Royal Danish Defence College, and also affiliated with Nasiffik, the Center for Foreign and Security Policy, here at Ilisimatusarfik. So in the position I'm in is a it's established as collaboration between Rasmus, the university here, and the Royal Danish Defence College. And I've been affiliated with the centre since 2021. So no more about that. I just wanted to make one point that that sort of feeds into Rasmus's three slogans as well. We're quite often asked about how the events occurring over the last months, the last year, has affected the relationship between Denmark, Greenland, and the US. And we often asked about the question about independence and the status of the notion of Greenlandic independence. And I think sort of my take on this is that this last year has probably, and especially the last month, has crystallized and made clear positions that have maybe not been so easy to see from the outside over the last couple of years. And the point is, it's actually highlighted by Nielsen, who had made a sort of a press meeting with the Danish Prime Minister just before the meeting in Washington, where he said, independence, autonomy is a relationship or conversation we have with Denmark. And I think this is important because it's very often journalists like you and scholars like us, and especially international scholars, that talk about independence and use that term independence and make us think about Greenland as a sovereign state. But yesterday in the parliament, the discussion that Rasmus just talked about, people talk about autonomy. They talk about co-decision. And some of the core, in my reading from the majority of the political spectrum, is that when we talk about independence, what they talk about is equality within the realm, equality in the relationship to Denmark, recognition as being an equal and not being subordinate to Denmark. So it's about equality, it's about autonomy, and it's about recognition. And I think these are the main things that we talk about. And even I think 2 years ago, or a bit more than a year ago at least, no, that's 2 years ago, I think that one of the current members of the Nalarak Party that are often in opposition to they are in opposition to the current government. They said that when we talk about independence, we are not talking about detachment from Denmark. We still want to, and we're still quite happy to have some kind of free association or other constitutional relationship to Denmark. So when I say things are crystallizing, it is that it becomes clearer and clearer that the end scenario is not necessarily, it's not a sovereign state. It's not the sort of the independence that is feared in some of the more security circles around the Trump administration and other places that envision Greenland as being suddenly sort of completely detached and trying to be an independent state. That has not, I don't think that has ever been on the agenda, and it's definitely not on the agenda within the coalition government that represents 75% of the votes in Greenland. And I think that's just important to keep in mind when we are assessing this unfolding relationship between Denmark and Greenland and the United States. And then I should probably stop there, but feel free to pick up and ask further questions. We are open for almost everything.
All right. Thank you. I think we'll now open up. So if people could in the chat raise their hand. Yes, please. We've got the first guest online. Welcome, Richard from Financial Times. We'll give the floor to you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, hi there. Thanks very much for doing this. I'm based in Oslo, so appreciate it. I just wanted to ask, particularly on the negotiations with the US, do you sense that the willingness for Greenland to compromise has narrowed somewhat? The mood is so anti-American that what's possible, what might have been possible a few years ago is not so possible now. And in particular, I'm thinking there is this idea that's floating around about not just having new bases, but of having a sort of shared sovereignty, a bit like the UK has in Cyprus.
So that's actually a really good question, because if we go back just a couple of years ago, and something that Jeppe and I have written about in the Arctic Yearbook a couple of years ago, there was very much a focus from Naalakkersuisut, the Greenlandic government, of enhanced cooperation with the US. There has been a US consulate in Nuuk. The US has been extremely good at doing soft diplomacy for half a decade, especially. And now we see, and some of this is media driven, some of this is talks in the supermarket, etc. That the trust of the US is very much different than it was just a couple of years ago. So when something happened, like there's an American investment in a mining project, or a case in point, there's this exporting water that have inclusion of the husband of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and actually also the in-laws of some of the other actors involved in this, then people get very, very suspicious. And the discussion, could there be new bases in southern Greenland on the east coast? If that's in close proximity to some of the local communities, that could be quite different than it was just a couple of years ago. But again, then the negotiation, I think they will keep very much in track on trying to circumvent some of the critique that's been from the US, and be open to new bases or new investment. That could be in surveillance or whatever that Golden Dome dynamics means, be open for that. But there is very much suspicion, and the trust in the US has been hampered quite substantially.
And I think just to add specifically to the sort of the notion of shared sovereignty, I think that would be crossing the red lines that has been sort of formulated in unison between Copenhagen and Nuuk. I actually think that Nuuk and Copenhagen has been quite good at coordinating and formulating sort of a shared vision of this. And I think, and sovereignty has been constantly mentioned as a red line that you do not cross, and that I take it would also include shared sovereignty. And I think this is a particular sensitive issue in Greenland, because there were two key things that were raised in 2009 when the Self-Government Act was introduced as a victory for Greenland, and one was being recognized as an independent, recognized as a people different from being Danish. And the other thing was the control of the ground, any mineral resources in the ground. So this is such a key part of this struggle. So to suddenly start to have to share it or divide it out, I think would be very difficult to imagine.
And just a short comment. So in Pihluvik Space Base, what was called Thule Air Base recently, the US is basically, to a very, very large degree, it is an area that the US control. There was a conflict with the service contract, just to showcase that it's not 100%. It still has to be something that is done in collaboration with the Greenlandic government, and that was all. And we also sometimes use the liken it to an embassy. So that area is very much something that the US or the foreign entity has control of, but the sovereignty question is really a red flag for both Denmark and Greenland.
Okay, thank you. I've got quite a few raised hands here, but I think when I give the floor to you, if you could just be kind to Jeppe and Rasmus and say who you are and also which media you represent. But I think we will go to Rita next. Thank you. Rita, are you there?
Hi, you can hear me now.
Sure.
Hi,
Welcome.
my name is Rita Krause. I work for the Portuguese news agency Lusa. And my question is maybe very basic, but it's just, at this point, I'm just going to ask it. You say, and it's everyone knows, that the US can increase their military presence in Greenland. So if that's the case, what is this all about? Why risk this relationship? That's the question.
I think you should ask somebody else.
What's your informed guess?
No, but it is actually a really good question. It's something that has been puzzling security observers, academics, but also American colleagues that I know quite well, has been puzzled. What is it exactly that the Trump administration want that is not already in the 1951 defense agreement, and all the times it's been revisited, the Gallico agreement from 2004, some of the letter of intents that has come out the last 5 years, that there's been an openness. So what happened was that back in the days, the US has several bases or airports, and it was by their decision that they choose to at some point only have one left. But back then there was an agreement, consensus, that if the US wanted to reopen or open new bases, they just needed to call a meeting, drink some coffee, and taking the soft diplomacy route. That is very clear from the document, from what has been signaled. So what has sometimes been saying that they're kicking up an open door and there's been an openness, and this actually just make it more complicated. The other answer is that because some of the security concerns, some of the things about mineral resources, that's doable. If there actually is if the motivation of Trump as a person is the imperialistic way of going on Mount Rushmore and buying new thing, then most of the negotiations that have been addressed are void to a large degree. But we're hoping that's not the case, and it's also stepping down for some of these arguments. But that is one of the hypotheses that has been ventured for a fairly long time. There's quite a lot of hypotheses what's actually the motivation, and we're only guessing.
Yeah, and I think, as Peter said in the beginning of this, there's been, we have had a lot of speculation in this. Are the security concerns, the mineral concerns, the Chinese concern, are they excuses, or is it a substantial need? And in many ways, it probably is an excuse to talk about this control, the need for control and ownership. At the same time, it feeds into a new sort of hemispheric logic that is in the new national security strategy of the US that sort of envisions some kind of, unfettered control, I think, to quote one of the people around Trump, within the Western Hemisphere. And, considering that, within the particular geopolitical imagination of the Trump, of some of this part of the Trump administration, Greenland belongs to that might justify this. But it might also just be, some kind of an excuse to have this claim to ownership. I just wanted to, and now you shouldn't give us a word, we can talk forever. But on this question of shared sovereignty, I'm just, Rasmus is right when he says that within the sort of the previous defense agreements, there is some kind of shared sovereignty within the defense areas, in the sense that the Americans within the defense areas have jurisdiction over their own personnel and, basically control the monopoly of violence, legitimate violence. They have the forces on the ground, of course. So there is a notion of shared sovereignty. I think what some people imagine now when you're talking about shared sovereignty is that it also concerns exploitation of the ground, of potential mineral resources, these kind of things, and that would be a red line. I think as long as you stay within the sort of shared defense, shared jurisdiction among the personnel there for a particular purpose, I think that's fine, because that's already within, as Rasmus said, that's already within the defense agreement. So it depends again, even what you mean by shared sovereignty, what it entails.
Thank you. I see more raised hands here. Before we go to those, we have got the French news agency AFP with us online. And Camille, she's written a question in the chat that I'll try to pass on to Rasmus and Jeppe. You were talking about feeling equal with Copenhagen within the community of the realm. In what sense is the opening of 2 general consulates this week a victory for Greenlandic diplomacy? And can we expect to see an increased diplomatic presence in Nuuk going forward?
Excellent question. So the Icelandic consulate opened more than 10 years ago. The US reopened a consulate that was closed just after the Second World War. The EU opened, that's not a consulate, but an EU office a few years ago. So we have this evolving diplomatic scene in Greenland, and the Canadian has been talking about opening the consulate, which actually is going to happen on Friday, together with the French. So this is something that is actually, or the French consulate is fairly new, but the other consulate is something that has been underway for several years, not something that's related to the current Trumbo deal. Greenland is also, and that might surprise some of you, do also have representations in Brussels, in Washington, D.C., that also include Canada, and there's talk about opening a country or representation in Ottawa by the end of this decade, in Iceland, and also in Beijing, even though there's no head of the office in Beijing at the moment. He went to Washington in summer. So we have this evolving diplomatic local scene, both in Nuuk, but also we have over many years Greenlandic diplomats working, networking, doing wonderful jobs in different capitals around the world. I don't know if it's actually quite complicated to open an office in Nuuk. One reason is there's not a lot of office spaces, and especially the EU had some problems getting in the taxes and how to have a position addressed, etc. But it is also a really interesting development, but it's not something that is tied directly to Trump.
No, and I think in some respect, yeah, you ask if it's a victory. Yes, in a sense it is a victory, because as Rasmus also talked about, there's been sort of an evolving international positioning and desire to develop sort of a foreign relations capacity in Nuuk, and in that respect, it's a victory. It's seen very positively in the sense that there's a great appreciation in Nuuk of the international support that has been sort of uttered from Europe, from around the world in this situation. And in terms of the formal question of equality, there's 2 sort of trajectories on this course, and the one is political practice, if you like, that Greenland is subordinate according to the Danish constitution to Denmark, but we still act as if we are an independent actor, and expanding these sort of diplomatic relations is part of that process. The other track in this is possible formal negotiations between Greenland and Denmark about possibly changing, having a new government, a new legislation governing the relationship. This could this could go in a lot of different directions, but that is sort of negotiating the formal relationship. And the first one I'm talking about, is the practice of acting more independent. Hope that makes sense.
Thank you. We'll give the floor to Maria Lopez. Are you with us online?
There's a hand.
Yes, I see a hand. Maria, are you with us?
Yes, but
Welcome.
but I cannot see myself in the video.
Oh, we can hear you. So I think
Okay.
it's okay for you just to pose your question to Nuuk.
Perfect. So this is Maria Paz Lopez from Spanish newspaper La Vanguardia, and I was in Nuuk for the elections last year, and I loved it really first time. My question is of another area is we've seen since Trump started to push on Greenland, we've seen in social media all these Greenlanders, influencers or not, showing the beauties of the country and talking how proud they are and so on. And I was wondering if there's figures, if the Greenland has noted an increase of tourism or of visitors, and if so, if there's figures about that in the last year, from which countries do the people go to visit? Thank you.
I mean, there have been a few reports from tourist agencies and of increased interest, and also no, that's too speculative. I don't know that. I think really you should just get in touch with Visit Nuuk, which is a tourist organization here in Nuuk, or Visit Greenland, which is a Greenlandic tourist organization. I'm sure they have quite up-to-date data and more precise information on this. But it's a good question.
I mean, I can add a little bit. So if we go back to 2019, Visit Greenland, the main tourist agency of promoting Greenland, their website actually crashed for a short while because there was so much interest in Greenland all of a sudden. And afterwards, because it didn't get as tense back in 2019, I think there was actually someone saying it was actually one of the biggest PRs, not a stunt, but now it's a little bit different. That there is, back in summer, there was a lot of cruise ships, and there is more and more tourists coming, but we also have like a cap. There isn't that many hotels in Nuuk or in Ilisimatusarfik where most people want to go. But we have a part-time colleague who is going like the more high-class visitors going fishing and doing like glamping. And he said his business is thriving because now he's also a fixer for all the journalists that wants to go to have some nice pictures from the fjord when BBC do some videos for their audience. But I mean, the tourism is increasing, and it will. But there's also like a natural capacity of how many we can actually host at the same time. There's not been built enough hotels, and that's going maybe slower than expected just some 5 years ago. But yes, there are more tourists, but as Jeppe said, you need to contact some of the tourist organizations to get the more tangible data.
Thanks.
I can't hear you, Peter. Are you?
Sorry. Sorry. No, I was just saying thanks for the tourism question. I think we can also facilitate some from here, try to help with some of the right contacts. And at least in the Danish media, I saw just within the last week, we can find that as well, that at least from people in Denmark wanting to travel to Greenland, there seems to be an increase. But that, of course, doesn't answer for the rest of the world. But we can find those details for you afterwards. I think I see a raised hand from Paulina. So Paulina, if you're with us, you are welcome to join us and ask your question. Thanks.
Hi, sorry, I couldn't find the unmute button. This is Paulina Patsua from Poland. I work for Okopress. I apologize for the noise, but I'm on the airport. I wanted to ask you, there was a question about the rise in tourism. I wanted to ask you about the rise of interest in mining investment in Greenland. And is Greenland currently changing its policy regarding, attracting and allowing investment in mining? I know it's very limited at the moment. Obviously, Trump's interest spiked the debate about the accessibility of those resources that Greenland has. EU has announced a new package of investment. So I want to see if you could maybe give a bit of a background on how is this issue going on now, because also, you read everywhere that because of the ice melting. And my question is, what is the time perspective of this ice melting and this huge mining investments occurring in Greenland? Thank you.
It's a good question. It's a big question. But we can say a few things. That mining and discussions about mining and riches of the ground has been sort of it's been on the agenda since at least 20 years, and it was a big thing back in 2009 when Greenland got self-government, when the Self-Government Act was introduced, and expectations were very, very high. And as you say, that it has been quite limited what has been established. One of the sort of the key obstacles is the lack of infrastructure. The investments that you need to make in order to establish a large-scale mining are just generally, they're massive. You sometimes have to build a port, you have to build roads where there's no infrastructure already through the mountains, and the entry cost of the startup cost are sort of prohibitive of establishing some of these mines. And I think that's sort of the key reason why you haven't seen more activity. I don't think you asked if there's been a change. There's supposed to be actually today, but that was cancelled. There was a new adjustment to the Raw Material Act on the agenda in the Parliament, but these are not big changes. I think it's been over the last decade, at least. It's a slow, long haul. And I think they're just continuing what they've been doing all along. Try to attract attention and try to attract investments. And of course, it's appreciated that it's beneficial for the potential mining industry in Greenland that you both in the US and in the EU and other places start to talk about critical raw materials, because that means that you might get state funding, you might get state guarantees behind investment. So it's not just a free market, but what the results of these is, I don't know yet. But there's not a big change in the actual approach to the mining sector in Greenland. That's one more thing I want to say.
Maybe in between, I can just add that Nielsen, who is the Minister of Minerals and several other things, has been quite adamant that Greenland is open for business, but you have to abide to the law that was started back in 2010, and it is complicated, but there are like a handful of projects that could happen in the not too distant future. There's a gold mine in southern Greenland that reopened recently. There are a few other projects that could happen. There's some project we have talked about for many years in southern Greenland, and you need to play the longer game. What we know from, say, Arctic Canada is that you get the get-go to actually open a mine, it easily takes 15 years or maybe even 2 decades to actually start making money out of this. And it's oftentimes junior companies. So actually international enterprises with a junior company from Canada or Australia that need funding, collaboration with several other actors, and sometimes they sell it off to others. So sometimes you also get a little bit conflicted. This is not something that the US or the EU or China can just start digging in the Greenlandic soil. It is companies. The EU, for example, can help out with infrastructure loans, etc., etc. But these are somewhat complicated to actually start digging in Greenland. But something that is been working on for decades and decades, and things are happening. But as Jeppe said, compared to what the pipeline dreams back in 2010, not that much has really happened in that sector.
Dreams of an Arctic Dubai or something like that.
Yes.
Mention one thing. One of the small changes that we are looking into is a new sort of a screening legislation to sort of to prevent adverse, basically that people who you don't want to be involved in your mining projects are involved in it, right? So a sort of a screening legislation, making it easier to sort of decide what kind of investments do you want to accept and what kind of investments are prohibitive. And I think there's one dimension to this and one layer to this, is that the environmental protection legislation is fairly strict compared to a lot of other countries, and sometimes it's debated whether the regulation frameworks, are they too harsh? Should they be more lenient? But again, there's a sort of a very established understanding of taking care of nature in Greenland and having a very intimate relationship to nature. So on the one hand, there's a great desire to sort of have a economic development in the mining industry. At the same time, there's also a concern and an awareness that this should not sort of end up in these kind of scary scenarios where mines leave a polluted area and sort of is environmentally degrading. So you have these sort of balancing these two sort of interest, if you like.
Just very briefly, I think this is quite important, debunk one myth. There's one project which is also the most controversial project, Kvanefjeld in southern Greenland, that you probably, if you've done some election campaigns stories back in the days, you heard of that as a uranium case. There is Chinese involvement in that, but there's also Danish and American involvement in that. But apart from that, there's not Chinese. There's been quite a few cases over time where there was Chinese investment in some mining project in Citronfjorden in northern Greenland, a mine close to Nuuk, etc., etc. But there's none left with Chinese involvement at the moment. And I think that's actually quite important and something that gets misconstrued quite often, that there are a lot of FDI from China. That is basically not the case in terms of mining.
Thank you. There's still quite a few questions in the chat and also raised hands. I think we'll now try to go to Ivalu. Are you with us? I believe a student of journalism. Welcome.
Yes, thank you. My question is, are there any specific developments you are particularly keeping an eye on in this geopolitical situation?
So obviously we hope that the diplomatic track that Nuuk, Jacobis Processen, etc. are involved in is going well. And then I think everybody in Greenland does that, check the news in the morning. Has Trump, while we were sleeping, said something that could change the status quo? So both that they were hoping, and we're still a little bit scared of the geopolitical dynamics at the moment.
Yeah, and I think it's very much, it's all of this is very much orchestrated by, initiative from the US. But I think just to maybe disagree a little bit, Rasmus, no, I agree with that we all look at on the media, but there's also a sense in that a lot of these debates have been fueled by, again, scholars, journalists that react to weird posts on social media. And I think we should also be sort of maybe calm down a little bit and say what is actually being on the table, what is being proposed, what initiatives are actually being taken, what is actually being done, and what will be the sort of concrete suggestions and initiatives that are going to push things in a particular direction. So that's what I'm very curious about.
Thank you. I think we go to, and Israeli newspaper. David, are you with us online? Then we can take your question.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Sure, I can at least.
Hi, I'm David. I'm in Stockholm, Sweden, but I'm a correspondent for Israeli daily newspaper called Haaretz. My question is this: going back to the kind of domestic politics in Greenland, when I was in Nuuk I think it was in May, quite a few months ago, I talked to a Nalerik politician who was speaking about the option of free association, like Palau or Marshall Islands have the US. And I'm wondering about this parliamentary session that you mentioned yesterday in the parliament in Nuuk. If you can sort of say a bit more, I know you mentioned it, but say a bit more about the discussions. Were there like disagreements? Were there arguments? Were there different party lines? And maybe a technical question, if there's any way one can actually read a protocol of that discussion, because I think it's quite interesting if there is anybody saying that one of the solutions to the crisis is kind of expedite the process with Denmark, saying here is a new stand, we have this new agreement with Denmark, instead of just years and years of talking about sort of theoretical potential independence.
There might be a recording on the Parliament's website just on the technical issue, and they usually it's usually there's a live feed from the Parliament, and usually they keep it on the Parliament's website, but it would be Greenlandic and Danish.
Exactly, that's the option.
That's the option.
But anyway, but if you can sort of give a bit more information on what actually happened there.
I don't know if I can. Okay, so after the election last year, there was, I think Jens Frederik Nielsen said that status quo is not an option, it's not a possibility. And it was sort of embraced by the Danish government and said, yes, we need to move things forward. There have been sort of announcement of increased Danish investments in the health sector, which has been a really sore political issue for the last couple of years, to sort of improve that, investments in infrastructure and things like that. So that's, and this sort of breaks away from the logic of the Self-Government Act, which says that the Danish economic contribution to Greenland should stay on a status quo level. Then there's a more substantial issue, which is sort of negotiating some of the, yes, as talked about earlier, renegotiating, reopening the sort of constitutional framework, if you like. How far they are in that process, I don't know. And I'm also, it can also, you know, I don't know how great the appetite is, but I think that everybody agrees that something should probably change within this relationship, because the Danish Prime Minister's way of dealing with this at the moment is to say that the Kingdom of Denmark consists of 3 countries, but the country is a nice non-legal term. So that's a way you can talk about equality, even if the Danish constitution does not posit them as exact equal partners. I don't know if this makes sense, otherwise come back. I didn't hear the word free association, I think, yesterday. Maybe I did, but then I forgot. Most of the discussion was about how to act and deal with the current situation. And I don't think it's too much to say that there is a disagreement with Nalerak, which is a party in coalition, representing about 25% of the votes, and all the other parties that are in a coalition government. And sort of so the coalition is sort of speaking more or less with one voice and saying, supporting the line of the government. And Nalerak is critical of the way they're handling it, but it's a little bit difficult to see exactly where the lines of divisions are, except that Nalerak is maybe saying that maybe you're getting too close to Denmark. We're concerned that this will make us more Danish or not moving further towards independence. But I think this is also, it comes down to a different senses of urgency about what the situation, how important is, how serious the situation is, and also how to deal with it. Because basically everybody agrees that, you know, long-term further autonomy, statehood within some constellation with Denmark or something else is a long-term goal. Do you have something to add?
Yeah, just to make a little commercial pause, that if you go to the webpage of Nasiffik, our Center for Foreign and Security Policy at UNIGL, there's actually quite a lot of fairly short policy papers and working papers on the free association that we did a couple of years ago. That was in the furtherance of the constitutional draft that was being published by Greenland. If we go back just a few years ago, that there was discussion, and some of the discussion about a free association actually emanated, especially in Siumut. And if we go back a couple of years, there was other parties that at least was open to start looking into how that model maybe could be something different than the status quo. That I think that's quite consensus in Greenland, even in Atassut, the most conservative party, that we need to change the status quo of the Kingdom of Denmark, but it's not really tangible what model that should be. And if things were much calmer, that could be something that we would devote our time to actually discuss, because we have some of the same voices in the Faroe Islands, that maybe we should revisit the Kingdom of Denmark, maybe look into some other models, how we can do this tripart thing. But now it's very much Nalarak who is using the free association model as something that we should look much more into. And that has kind of been put, not in the garage, but at least that has been put to pause for maybe at least 3 years, let's call it that. So there's something that is being discussed quite often, and we did some work on free association in collaboration with the Danish Institute of International Studies. And what was very present is that even though Greenland decides to have a free association, it's kind of a conceptual stretching. There's quite a lot of models that could fit with that. Should we look more to New Zealand's free association, or some of the three Americans, or could we do something, a Greenlandic translation of that? So it's never been quite, even though this is something that's been discussed since the 80s and 90s in Greenland, in very close circles of diplomats and politicians, it's never been quite clear what is actually a free association model could look like in Greenland. And that is no clearer as of yet in the current climate.
And I think, just to add, I mean, I don't think it really came up yesterday, and the position of the government at the moment is saying we're not having these discussions at the moment. Again, the discussion, as Jens Frederik Nielsen said, the discussion about autonomy or independence is a conversation we have with Denmark. Right now, we're dealing with a completely different situation. And I think there's just, again, there's a concern, there's an anxiety about what are the intentions of the US. And there's a very sort of, you also hear, there's a strong, and I think that concern in the majority of the political spectrum is overshadowing the discussions about how to increase autonomy. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's very helpful.
Welcome.
Thank you. We will see if we've got Jørn Skjerpe from Norway with us. Jørn, are you online? Welcome.
Yes. Hello. Can you hear me?
Hello. Yes, I can at least.
That's great. Thank you for hosting this event. I just came from the Oslo Security Conference. I spoke to some experts there about the Golden Dome ambition of Donald Trump. A lot of experts aren't quite sure what the Golden Dome, what is it actually, other than large ambitions. I was wondering how this, in your view, how this Greenlanders and politicians in Greenland view these Golden Dome ambitions and Greenland's role in it.
I haven't seen any sort of political debates picking it up. It's been, I mean, it was sort of meant, it was announced by Trump a bit more than a year ago, right? As the Iron Dome. And then he sort of started to talk about it again during the meeting in Switzerland. And then it's been picked up. I don't think the particular vision of the Golden Dome is taking up a lot of space in the political discussions here. I think it's sort of lumped over the larger debate of whether the US needs to or see a need to increase its defensive presence in Greenland or not. And again, if we are talking, and I think Vance is talking more, JD Vance, the vice president, is talking more about missile defense and actually Golden Dome. And, that has also been an agenda before. And on the previous round by George W. Bush, when with that missile, early 2000s, new missile defense, that discussion about the upgrade of the Thule radar, as it was called that back then, was what led to the process where Greenland became signatory to the defense agreement in 2004. So, there is a relationship between the sort of the political developments and the sort of sometimes and the US desires to sort of do something more in Greenland. But I think that's as far as the discussions have gone as yet, right?
But I will say that because it is not clear what the Golden Dome exactly is, but it feeds into discussion that are already there in NORAD between Canada and the US in terms of surveillance, in terms of big data, of getting some of these situational awareness, as military jargon puts it. And I think Greenland, and that has been quite clear, especially the last couple of years, is much more clear on the backing and seeing the virtues of being part of deterrence, of surveillance, of being part of the this defense complex of deterrence, and actually being part of that could be in close collaboration with North American Arctic. I was in Ottawa in early December, and there's a lot of discussion that is in the North Atlantic Arctic that makes sense to include Greenland in some of these dynamics and some of the solutions that are being discussed. But as Jeppe mentioned, it's not something, I think there's something that's been discussed in very close circles within the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Nuuk, but not something in the public at large.
Except that, I mean, there's a very profound understanding in Greenlandic politics that yes, we are part of the defense of North America. So of course, if there's, if things are moving in terms of air defense or space defense or integrated air and missile defense, as it's called, we will be part of it. One thing that is maybe worth keeping an eye on, and which I don't think is discussed a lot in Greenland, is if the development of a new missile defense or the Golden Dome or whatever it's going to be is going to follow the ambition that is set out in the presidential order from 27 January last year, I think it was, to have space-based interceptors and space-based, detectors, you will have to have a lot of probably maybe polar launch sites, and there Greenland could also play a different role than that. Rather than just hosting ground-based installation, there is something about the access to space where Greenland could also play a role. And this becomes a little bit speculative, but also quite, the scope of this sort of race to space and the place of Greenland within this is something that might be worth keeping an eye on a longer term.
And just last summer, there was actually some rumors I haven't heard, and these are discussion within closed door and by military actors, so they are not really that open what is going on. But there was some rumors last summer there's going to be radars, not just in Pituffik in that area, but that could be other radars on the east coast, maybe the west coast, south coast of Greenland. But I don't know too much tangible about how those discussions are going. But that could be part of the debates that are going on in that working group who's trying to solve the current conflict.
There's actually, I think there's an announcement in the Danish defense agreement that they will install a coastal radar on the east coast. So,
Thank you.
Jørgen, no, we think we will we'll proceed from here. We got roughly 5 minutes left or so. So we'll try to do our best to get a few more questions in. With us online, we have got Ahmed, who is written in the chat. And I'm not sure if it's right within your area of research, but we'll try. It's more or less, it's something also, of course, might be happening in Greenland, but also outside, about fake news and misinformation. Ahmed is saying that, of course, there's been these, as we all know, deployment of troops from Denmark and other European nations up to Greenland. And his take on it is that following that, there has been some misinformation after that, maybe on social media in Europe, somebody saying that now the Germans are pulling back, the Danes are not going anywhere, all those kind of things. So the whole issue of misinformation, are there any kind of views from your side, who's behind it, and is it still an issue in the Greenlandic debate?
So if we just go back 14 months ago, I and some good collaborators, some really data nerds were doing a very big Facebook scraping, and Greenland is still very much a Facebook country, the most important social media by far. And that was a non-finding. We did scrape a lot of different political fora on Facebook and didn't find that much. And I know that there's the most known example in Greenland is back in 2019. Actually, there was a fake letter stating that the then Minister of Foreign Affairs, Anne Parker, so we know it as an Lone letter, was recircling in different different social media. But just if we just go back not that long ago, we didn't find that much disinformation. So disinformation is different from misinformation it is an malign intent from foreign actors. And then we're starting to pay more and more attention to also to the misinformation that could happen. And I know some of us, our colleague is pinpointing that as somewhat the biggest concerns, that some of these things could get circulated, because still, but less so than it was just a few years ago, it is because Greenlandic is such a difficult language to learn, and the grammar is quite makes German seems easy compared to that. It's very, very difficult to infiltrate some of these local discussion, because some of the translation tools are getting much better very rapidly. We could see into a future that you can actually do disinformation, misinformation with malign intent. What we mostly see is something that is probably not ordered from some of the Russian trolls or American think tanks, but more something that is more individuals doing something that is trying to stir conflict. But it's something we're looking more and more into, that could become a bigger problem in Denmark. And because some of the tensions within the Kingdom of Denmark is already there, our report also stated, the report is in Danish, but I guess you can get translation tools to look at that, that some of these issues, because some of the conflict is already there, and as it is in Greenland, you can basically see if there's a Facebook page that is trying to inflict misinformation. We can see it quite quickly that this is probably because we don't know that person, or we don't know that it's very easy to detect. But if it starts circling within communities where we know these, then it could cause a bigger problem. But it's something that has been not an adamant problem just a few years ago, to something that is getting more and more concerned with us within those tense dynamics that we see presently.
I think there's maybe just 1 minute left. So we'll just see. Richard, are you still with us online? Then we can just maybe in this last minute accommodate a last question, and then we'll wrap it up after that.
Yeah, I'm still there. It was just really going back to what you said, Jeppe, at the very, very beginning in your introduction. I just wonder how much you think that this whole situation is based on a kind of misunderstanding from the US of how imminent Greenlandic independence was going to be, and allied to that, I mean, what is there a majority of Greenlanders that want to be independent now? Because there seem to be very few opinion polls that actually address that question.
Yeah, I think in terms of the motivation of the US, I think we have different. It seems that there are different groups that represent a particular logic, and I think those advocating the strategic need for a greater US presence or control with Greenland in case of Greenlandic independence, I think they have partly at least misread or misunderstood what the discussion is about. And it's not like, the voices that come out, I mean, it can be confusing and it's difficult to find your own language. And a lot of this discussion takes place in Greenlandic. And when that's translated, it can be translated into different terms. So, I mean, there are ample of room for misinterpretation or various interpretation. But I think, yes, I think there's part of it that comes down to a misunderstanding of what the ambition is. And as you say, yes, we don't have opinion polls. We can see, so, what I'm leaning against is that you have a government that represents 75% of the population that was elected last year. And they are, yes, I already paraphrased their take on this. So I don't think that there's a great appetite for sort of complete independence, at least as all in Greenland. And I think one of the things that, very briefly, that we tend to forget are all the areas that work quite well, where there are a lot of collaboration between Danish and Greenlandic authorities. How, we got almost 20,000 Greenlanders living in Denmark, taking education, going there for a while, going back. A lot of Greenlandic people going to Denmark when they get old, have family in Denmark. So I think probably, and now it's a guess, and some Greenlandic politicians might disagree with me, but I think that we tend to underestimate the attachment, at least seen from the outside. But again, that's also a very Danish argument, so maybe I'm just being Danish.
Thank you. I think it's coming up to 3 o'clock here in Copenhagen, so I think Jeppe and Rasmus, on behalf of all of us, a big thanks to both you guys for taking an hour out of your schedule to brief us here and take the questions. We do hope to see you back again in this online format, or maybe even here in Copenhagen, if there's a chance. But at least from us here at the IPC, and I guess also, I'm sure, all the journalists, thanks for your time. And to the rest of you, I think most of you you get our emails about events and stuff here at the IPC. So if there's something else coming up on Greenland or on other interesting topics, we will make sure to keep you posted. So thanks everybody, and have a nice day.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for turning up.